looking behind your eyes. It's been there for quite a while. I just wanna be the one to remind you what it is to smile.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Leslie Ford-Toy, and I'm the president of the Toronto Chapter of the International Game Developers Association. Oops. Thank you. I'm very excited to welcome you to tonight's main event. We have a special keynote to kick off our 2013-2014 season. But before I get into that, since many of you are new to the IGDA, and maybe it's your first time here, I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a brief introduction. So let's go. The Toronto Chapter is a community group dedicated to the professional development of game creators in and around the GTA. We host monthly meetings, usually in the form of presentations or panels, with the goal of helping individuals become better at their craft. We do this by sharing best practices, promoting professionalism, inclusivity, diversity, and dialogue between developers. In the past year, our topics have included project development postmortems, entertainment law, serious games, education, games media, and the business of making games. We would not be able to do this without the dedication of our volunteers. Ryan Henson-Creighton, Emily Clarafan, Danielle Engels, Alex Hayter, Justin Kwok, Randy Orenstein, and Jonathan Remedios. We also want to thank our sponsors who have allowed us to operate as an organization by providing venue spaces and materials, as well as direct benefits to our community, such as free legal consultation and the means to bring in incredible guest speakers, which is why we are all here tonight. Tonight's guest is a veteran at Naughty Dog, having worked as a designer and co-writer on both Uncharted and Uncharted 2. His latest project is one of the most critically acclaimed games of this year and has helped raise the bar for narrative and story in our industry. Please welcome creative director and writer of The Last of Us, Mr. Neil Druckmann.
Hello. Thank you all for showing up. When Leslie invited me for this thing, I was like, oh, it'd be a small IGDA thing, you don't have to worry about it. And then they did a couple of things that kind of stressed me out, which was one, they called it a keynote, and two, they charged money for it. So I was like, okay, I need to make this kind of significant with some takeaways. So I was like, okay, well, Last of Us is kind of known for its storytelling. I was like, I'll talk a lot about the craft of writing, the craft of working with actors, and how we kind of brought the story to life. But then when I put that talk together, it was pretty boring. So, and I figured if you really want to learn that stuff, read these two books. If you haven't, and you're interested in writing, like, you'll become a better writer just by reading these two books. I kind of reread them on a regular basis, probably once a year, and directing actors, I reread before every scene I shoot with some actors. So what is this talk about, actually? When I started putting it together, I was really intrigued with this idea of writing honestly, and what does it mean? I've said this in interviews before, like talking about the ending, how the ending felt honest, but I was like, I'm not sure I really know what that means. So kind of this talk is going to go off on a bunch of different tangents, but bear with me, there's a point at the end. And the other caveat I want to give is, while this talk is kind of my personal journey as a writer, The Last of Us was made by a team of very talented people, and in no way I want to take away the credit of what they've done. The Last of Us is as good as it is because of its execution, more so than the writing. But having said that, let's get started. Oh, and spoilers. I hope you've played the game. It'll be easier to follow if you have. If not, I hope you don't mind it spoiled for you, because we're going to get into the ending and other stuff like that. So how did The Last of Us start? Back in 2009, our president, Evan Wells, and Christoph Balestra, we had just shipped Uncharted 2, and it was pretty successful for us. And they decided, there's a lot of people on the team that were very talented, but eager to do other stuff, maybe above the role where they're at. So they're like, let's start branching out. Let's create this second team. So they put Bruce Straley, who was game director in Uncharted 2, and I on the second project. And our task was, and this is the first time we're showing this, to reboot this game, Jak and Daxter. And these are some of the concepts from that project. So we spent a long time kind of exploring the world of Jak and Daxter, and how would we reboot it? What would it mean to bring these characters back? What are some story ideas that we were getting excited by? Here's some more stuff. So number 2 is pretty cool, where you see them fishing. And as much as we liked a lot of these concepts and kind of exploring this fantastical world, we found that the ideas we're passionate about were kind of getting away from what Jak and Daxter was, and we're questioning is like, are we doing this for marketing reason and naming something Jak and Daxter when it's not really Jak and Daxter? Or are we really passionate about it? And the answer was like, we felt it was more for marketing. And we just, again, we felt like we weren't doing service to what the fans of this franchise really liked, even if the reinvented Daxter is pretty damn good looking. So we went to our boss and said, do we have to do this? And he said, no. I thought it would just be easier for you guys if you started with something, but if you want to do something else, come up with something else. So we're like, awesome. And we left the office, and Bruce and I looked at each other and we're like, okay, now what do we do? And to kind of answer this question, I have to go even further back in time to kind of explore where some of these ideas came from. So let's go back in time. 2004. I was a grad student at Carnegie Mellon University at a program called the Entertainment Technology Center. And it's this kind of program that combines design and programming and art and storytelling, and it's very project-driven. So I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and so was this guy. And if you don't know who that is, that's George Romero, the director of Night of the Living Dead, the father of zombie films. So one of our professors was buddies with George Romero, and we based a whole project around George Romero. And it was called Project Nottled, or Night of the Living Dead. And the idea that was we would break up into smaller groups, and each one of us would come up with a concept for a Night of the Living Dead game. We'd pitch it to George, and then he would pick one. And based on the ones we picked, we would then make a prototype of that game. Water. So this was kind of the idea I was working on, which was basically ripping off the mechanics of Ico, ripping off the character of Hartigan from Sin City, and plopping them into the world of Night of the Living Dead. And all these things are kind of popular culture, media things that have been very inspirational to me, and I drew a lot of ideas from them, as you'll see. So the idea was for this kind of the story, and there was very little story to this thing. You had this cop-like character. This is my artwork, by the way, so don't laugh. You had this cop character, and he was trying to protect this girl in this world of zombies. And he held her by the hand, very Ico-like, and fought them off. That's not the interesting bit. The interesting bit was, just like the character of Hartigan in Sin City, he had this heart condition. And every time this thing would act up, you would switch control between the cop and the girl. And that was kind of the most interesting bit for me, is like that idea of using controlling a different character to kind of elicit empathy and make you view the two characters in different lights. And then the story progressed where he was trying to get her to safety, and eventually he gets bitten and she has to shoot him. Again, the story wasn't the exciting part. So we pitched that to George Romero, and he said, so he picked one of the other ideas that were much better at the time. And kind of like the idea of these characters got shelved. And I graduated from that program, and I got a job at Naughty Dog. So I started Naughty Dog as a programmer / wannabe designer / wannabe writer. And at the time, I was reading a lot about storytelling. I was reading that book by Robert McKee. And I was really hungry for just writing. And I remember those characters back from when I was a student, and I was really drawn to them. And I was like, okay, well, what's another way I can explore those characters? I can't do it as a programmer. What if I do a comic book? So I was like, okay, I kind of like scrapped a lot of the ideas and just kept that core concept of having this strong kind of guardian character and then this female character where the roles at some point would switch, and I really kind of liked that idea. So this was take 2. And I decided I was going to write it and draw it all myself in my spare time. It was called The Turning. And it was about now, like, I developed the characters a little bit more, and the dude was now a criminal who's lost his daughter, and in trying to protect this girl, he was trying to redeem his past, because in a lot of ways, his past was responsible for his daughter's death. And again, it was mostly about him trying to get this girl to safety. At some point, his past catches up with him, with his business partner. He gets tortured. She ends up killing the guy. And again, the roles switch where she becomes the savior. So I put this whole pitch together. I had a bunch of pages drawn. I had the script for like a 6-issue arc. I pitched it to an indie publisher. And he said, I like it, but I don't love it. Ultimately, I'm going to have to pass. So again, idea got shelved. Like, all right, well, I'll do something else. In the meantime, I switched over to design, and I worked on these games. So as a studio, we learned so much by working on Uncharted as far as storytelling and gameplay and how to combine the two, how to kind of mirror set pieces with emotional beats in the story. And if you're interested in a lot of that stuff, Bruce Straley and I gave a GDC talk. You could find a GDC Vault at 2010 called Creating the Active Cinematic Experience. But I'm not going to talk about that. While working on Uncharted 2, Bruce and I would have these dinners where we just kind of discuss blue sky ideas of like story ideas or just gameplay concept, and we both loved Ico a lot, as you can kind of tell from our games. And this one idea that we kept kind of coming back to and brainstorming was this concept of the mute girl. And the idea was that in Uncharted 2, Nathan Drake would get to this Nepalese city that's war-torn. You'd be part of a resistance group, and you camp down with them for the night. And one of this girl that was mute, and the idea to make her mute was that everything that happens between you is all based on gameplay mechanics. So she would wake you up and kind of motion for you to follow her, and you'd stand up, and everyone's still sleeping, and you can hear gunshots in the distance. And you're like following her into an alley, and she starts climbing this fire escape, and you follow her like, climbing pipes all the way to the top, and then she shares with you this view of the city that she calls home. And it was, in our minds, it was a really beautiful moment of how you can bond with someone through gameplay. And again, that idea didn't make it into Uncharted 2. It just didn't work with the story we're trying to tell. It kind of made it into as Tenzin, the idea of this rescuer, this guy that saves your life, and you go with him to this cavern and adventure together. But we still kind of had that idea, that excitement of that mute girl in the back of our mind. The other thing that happened is we watched BBC. And if you haven't seen the video of the cordyceps, I highly recommend it, but for those that don't know, cordyceps is this kind of fungus that takes over ants and essentially turns them into crazy zombies. It's pretty awesome. Water break. So now we're back at that moment of that, now what? So I have this idea in the back of my head about this comic book / project idea that I was kind of just intrigued with the swapping characters. We had that idea of the mute girl. We have this cordyceps idea. And I would talk to Bruce about all these, and we kind of discuss, can you make gameplay out of that? And we kind of explored for a while. And we got kind of excited about the idea of making a game around all those concepts together. But then, for some reason, I decided to change it quite a bit. And I'm not sure why. Maybe because now it's a game, it had to be more gamey. And the first project we started kind of, moving forward on was called Mankind. And the idea is very similar to what you've seen in The Last of Us, that the cordyceps has jumped from insects to people. And the people it infects, it can kind of create monsters or kill them. But the twist, the thing that was different about this idea, was that it only infected women. And you found the one girl that it didn't infect, and that was Ellie. And you kind of protected her and tried to like bring her to this lab where they were kind of finding a cure. And there were a lot of things that we were really excited about this idea, but ultimately it failed. And the reason it failed is because it was a misogynistic idea. And it's hard for me to say, and I'm kind of airing some dirty laundry here, but I'm really proud that at Naughty Dog we have this really flat structure where people can speak up. If they don't like ideas, or the story isn't working, or gameplay isn't working, someone can say something. And a lot of the female workers at Naughty Dog came up and said, I don't like this idea. I understand what you're trying to do, that it is ultimately a story about the love of a girl, but the way it's coming off is you have a bunch of women turning into monsters, and you're shooting them in the face. So I had a lot of attachments to the idea, and I refused to kind of let it go, but eventually I did have this kind of awakening, and I realized that was not good. So that got scrapped. And then over the next several months, Bruce and I kind of hold ourselves in a room and like picked bits and pieces of the story that we liked, kind of came up with environments that were interesting to us, and we put this thing together, this pitch that's now going to be much closer to what you saw in the game. So the following is a slightly shortened version of that pitch. I tried to shorten it some more, but I couldn't, so it's a little long, but I just want you guys to see like the state we're at when we finally pitched this to our bosses and to Sony. So this was the story of The Last of Us. So it starts in present day. The idea of the cordyceps has already jumped to people. Chaos is starting. People are attacking each other. It's already kind of affected this small rural town. And we get to meet our hero, Joel. And for Joel, it's all about this moment, this prologue, is scooping up his daughter and escaping. She's the thing that he cares for the most. And the military's been called in to try to contain this thing. There's chaos, they're shooting people, and in all that mayhem and trying to escape, Joel's daughters get shot, and on that we slam to black. And then the story picks up 20 years later. And we see what 20 years has done to this man, how he went from like a loving father to someone that's willing to do anything to survive. He's crossed all these moral lines. He's almost unrecognizable as the man we saw before. And Joel operates within this black market of this quarantine zone that's run by what's left of the government. It's martial law, so it's very oppressive. There's checkpoints. People get scanned for infection. Anyone scans positive, it's executed and killed on the spot. And Joel has a partner, Tess, and she's kind of a leader of this gang that Joel is a part of. And Tess is just as ruthless as Joel, if not more so, and we get to see that when they go and torture a guy that kind of stole some of their shit. And then they're approached by a doctor that lives in the quarantine zone, and she's wanted by the military, and she hires them to smuggle her out of the quarantine zone. That was the first inception of Marlene. But she's not alone. She's got this 14-year-old girl with her, and they both have to escape together. So Joel is reluctant now that he sees this girl. It reminds him of his daughter, but Tess convinces him it's just cargo, Joel. So the idea is they're going to approach this checkpoint where Tess's brother works. When no one's else around, he's going to open the gate for them. They're going to sneak out, bring them to this militia. They're going to take over, then they'll return, Joel and Tess will return to the city and get paid. But as soon as they open the gate and they try to do that, there was this convoy that was coming back in. They spot them. Why the hell are there civilians trying to escape this quarantine zone? Scan everyone. And they go down the line scanning people, and Ellie gets tested positive for the infection. And now she's dragged to the side. She's about to be executed. Joel remembers his daughter. He stands up, wrestles a gun out of the soldier's hand. This firefight breaks out, and when all the dust settles, Tess's brother is killed in kind of the firefight. And now Tess holds Joel responsible for this thing, and they split ways, and Joel escapes the city with Ellie and Marlene. And they get to the outside part of the city, where now we see like what years has done to the infected, and we like have to fight them. The crew kind of escape by the skin of their teeth, but not before the doctor is bitten and starts to turn. And before she turns, she tells Joel, the girl's not infected, in fact, she's immune, and there's this group on the other side of the country that's trying to find a cure. It's up to you to get her there. So at this point, they leave Marlene with a gun. She kills herself because she doesn't want to turn. And Joel is stuck with this girl, and together they go on this mission across the country, where we get to see beautiful vistas and run into wild animals and run into different kind of wild animals. And the idea was that, again, coming back to that concept of the more time these characters spend with one another, the more they change one another. And, you know, Joel's kind of humanity comes out, whereas Ellie becomes much more capable, whether it's learning how to pick up a gun and shoot people or pick up a pipe and break their face. And the idea, again, was to build up to this climactic moment where Joel gets incapacitated when Tess, this relentless force from his past, catches up with him. And he gets so injured that Ellie now becomes the protector, both in story and in gameplay. And we knew we wanted this part to be really long and significant to get you to feel what it's like to be this 14-year-old kid now trying to protect this man. And now when she's kind of cornered and it looks like she's done for, he comes back to life, and now they work together to kind of escape the worst of mankind, these cannibals. And eventually they find this lab out on the West Coast. And the doctor, in order to run some tests on Ellie, he has to put her under, like anesthetize her, and he runs some tests, and when he looks at the results, he comes up to Joel, and he says, "It's complicated." And on that we slam to black. And then Ellie comes to, and she's in the back of a car, and she's kind of confused. She's not sure what's going on, what happened to the cure, like the whole mission. And Joel tells her, there is no cure, we're too late. Whatever antibodies you have, they're all gone. We had to leave the lab. And they get in a fight because she's not sure she believes what he's telling her. But again, Tess, this relentless force, slams into the truck. She's now with this their old gang, and they're trying to like get revenge on Joel. And they surround Joel and Ellie in this ranch house. In order to escape, Joel finds this air duct that only Ellie can fit through. He tells her, sneak out, steal Tess's car. I'm going to fight them here and distract them. I'll meet you back, keep going west towards that city we've heard about, where supposedly they're trying to kind of restore humanity or restore society. Reluctantly, Ellie escapes. As Joel, you kind of have this climactic fight with your old gang, but eventually you get captured by Tess. And now we see just how far Tess has come in this relationship and how she's willing to torture Joel to make him suffer. And just like she lost her brother, she wants to kill Ellie in front of him just to make him pay for that. And Joel tells her, there's nothing you could do to me. There's nothing you could cut. I've already essentially sold my soul to save this girl. And on that, we flash back to the lab where the doctor was telling Joel, it's complicated. And then we hear the rest of the conversation, and the doctor says, well, she has the cordyceps inside her, but it's mutated in such a way that it's no longer kind of like affecting her brain. And I believe if I can remove it, we can produce a vaccine, but it's so intertwined with her organs, it's going to kill her. And Joel says, well, then find someone else. And the doctor says, well, I'm not really asking you, it's just what needs to get done. I just felt it was a civil thing to do to tell you. And before the doctor can call for help, Joel kills him. And the idea that Joel has come so far with this girl that has saved him physically, mentally, and in some ways spiritually, that he's willing to kill anybody that might threaten her. And as Tess is finishing torturing Joel, she realizes he's not going to talk, and she levels a gun against his head, and on the gunshot, we slam to black. And then we're back with Ellie. And as she's driving, she pulls off the side of the road, and she realizes Joel was lying to her. He's not going to get away. And she turns back. And for a second time, you're playing as Ellie. And you're sneaking into the ranch house. You're climbing up the stairs where Joel is being tortured. And now you hear that conversation again where Joel was being tortured, and you realize you're back in time. And in fact, it's Ellie that bursts into the room right before Tess was going to shoot Joel, and she ends up shooting Ellie. Sorry, she ends up shooting Tess. She doesn't shoot her. She doesn't shoot herself. That would have been a bigger twist of the end. And then Ellie and Joel kind of escape from that ranch house, and the story ends with them kind of on this precipice of San Francisco, the city that they've been hearing about. They can see electricity in the distance. And Joel looks at Ellie and smiles, and he's hopeful that they could have a future in this world, even without a cure. So that was the story as we pitched it, probably mid to late 2010. So, It failed for kind of a lot of reasons. The biggest of which, I think, is Joel's motivation. Like, Joel went from like being this kind of like hardened survivor to this father figure in an instant. As soon as Ellie reminded him of his daughter, he was willing to kill soldiers and protect her and just throw his whole old life away, and even like abandoning his old partner. And every time we'd kind of pitch the story, we'd hear the kind of like the comments like, man, Joel's turning pretty quickly. And again, some of this issue was my letting go of, like, I got attached to certain ideas and it was just hard to kind of release them. The other problem that we had was Tess. I guess in some ways this was a bigger problem where her motivation was even harder to buy into. Here was Joel's old partner, and to no fault of his own, her brother died, and now she's going to go crazy and take her whole gang and pursue him across the country for a year. It's like she just seemed like a psycho. Like you didn't buy into it. It just seemed kind of a weird thing that we stuck in the story just for the sake of having this antagonist. And again, every time, but the problem with both of these things, and why I held on to them for so long is like I didn't want to let go of that ending. That ending in my mind was so cool when you get to play Ellie a second time and save Joel, but we just approached it from all these different angles for so long, and eventually it was like, okay, what if we just cut that ending? What if we didn't end it there? So one of the things that we did that kind of fixed both of those problems with Joel and Tess is we changed Tess's role. And Tess now went from this kind of hardened survivor to someone that has this unconscious desire where she wants redemption, even more so than Joel. And when she hears that Ellie might be immune, she clings to that. And then she's the one that gets bitten instead of this doctor. And what that bought us is, one, we could take kind of Tess out of the picture and she no longer was this antagonistic force. But she also, now Joel is taking care of Ellie out of his obligation to Tess, which you bought because they lived together for such a long time and they had this relationship. And that kind of helped with Joel's story because now it bought us a lot of time for Joel to be alone with Ellie. And for you as a player, being as Joel, you get to see how cool Ellie is and you want to care for her and you want to form this bond with her. The other issue, so once we remove that, is okay, well, what the fuck do we do with our ending? Now we have we don't have this personal antagonism. You get to this lab, because we decide we're going to, the climax will be at the lab instead of this ranch house with the doctors, because that's kind of the peak of Joel's arc. And there was a programmer that suggested, well, what if you brought Marlene back? What if this person that clearly knows about these people out west, well, they could make it out west. And bringing Marlene back also had this interesting thing that it helps humanize the counter-argument to what Joel was doing. And we did our best to not treat Marlene as a villain. Is to just say, here's a person that cared for Ellie just as much as Joel did, but she just made the opposite decision. She felt like it's okay to kill one to help the many. So this was the new ending that we had at the time. Joel makes it to this lab. Ellie kind of drowns trying to save him. Joel gets knocked out, and when he comes to, Marlene is there. And Marlene tells Joel they've already made this decision to operate on Ellie and remove kind of the cordyceps from her. And Joel makes the same decision as you saw in the other story where he kills the doctors and picks up Ellie and tries to escape the lab. But he also shoots and kills a helpless Marlene. Again, it helped us kind of take Joel, or what we thought at the time was taking him to the end of the line to show just how far he's willing to go, that he's willing to shoot and kill someone that might pose a risk to Ellie in the future. And he lies to Ellie, just as in the kind of the previous version. And in the end of it, they ended up at a different town, but it's the same kind of concept where Ellie buys the lie, and they walk off towards this town as the camera pans back, and we get that hopeful beat, that hopeful note that we had before. So why did that fail? The tone was wrong. This is kind of, it gets into some of these gut feelings are hard to articulate after the fact, but it didn't feel right. The characters, both Joel and Ellie, their arcs didn't go to the end of the line, which is this concept that Robert McKee talks about, that character arcs are kind of like these philosophical arguments, and you got to take that argument all the way to the end, and if you don't, then you kind of have to keep exploring it. I'll get into more of that in a bit. But it just wasn't honest. So what does that mean? Like, again, that concept of writing honestly. So I'm going to go off on a tangent before coming back to the ending. It's going to get a little philosophical, so bear with me, and it might get a little bit sappy. But so what does it mean? Well, maybe it means that you find an idea that really resonates with you. And no matter how many times that idea fails, you stick to it because for some reason it speaks to you. And you have to keep exploring it and keep coming back to it and bring it to life. Or maybe it's about letting go. And it's knowing that idea will become way stronger through interpretations of people much more talented than you. Whether it's actors, animators, composers, designers, programmers, a team of some of the most talented people in entertainment. And that you find a core of people that you really trust, that understand story, and are going to call you out on your bullshit. And those things are definitely true, but it still doesn't help us answer like what is honest and what isn't. So is there something deeper that we can find? So in his book, Story, Robert McKee talks about the writer's responsibility. And essentially he says, you have no social responsibilities in your writing. The only thing you have a responsibility is to tell the truth. And this is a quote from the book. He says, therefore study your story climax and extract from it your controlling idea. But before you take another step, ask yourself this question. Is this the truth? Do I believe in the meaning of my story? If the answer is no, toss it aside and start again. If yes, do everything possible to get your work into the world. So let's go back to that ending, and I kind of want to show you the ending that the game shipped with, and then we'll kind of break it down and why I think it's honest. So let's take a look.
Hey, wait. Back in Boston, back when I was bitten, I wasn't alone. My best friend was there, and she got bit too. We didn't know what to do. So, she says, let's just wait it out. You know, we can be all poetic and just lose our minds together. I'm still waiting for my turn.
Ellie.
Her name was Riley, and she was the first to die. And then it was Tess. And then Sam.
None of that is on you.
Oh, you don't understand.
I struggled for a long time with surviving. And you, no matter what, you keep finding something to fight for. Now, I know that's not what you want to hear right now.
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
So one of the things that happened to me during production, I say happened to me, that's kind of a weird way of phrasing it, I became a dad to a girl. And one of the first aha moments I had when kind of working on the story and the structure is when we figured out Joel's arc. And his arc is all about this irrational love you feel for your kid, that you would do anything to take away their pain, and definitely anything in the world to save them from harm. And it's about how far this guy who's become a father to Ellie, how far he's willing to go to save her. Clearly he's willing to give up his life. That comes pretty easily for him because he doesn't care much about it. But then we see he's willing to give up his friends and family's life or put them at risk. All these walls and defenses that he's put around himself to kind of protect his emotional state, he's willing to throw all those down and put those at risk because it's worth it. It's worth putting that at risk to have that love of your kid. Even though that you might have to deal with something horrible happening to them. And he's willing to put his soul on the line, right, damning the rest of mankind in exchange for this girl's life. But what happens here in this lie and then this emphasis on the lie is this is kind of taking his journey to the end of the line. That he's willing to put his relationship with Ellie on the line, the thing that he cares for the most. He's willing to risk that in order to protect Ellie. And that final pause, and when Ellie says okay, means that she gets it. She knows he's lying, but she's willing to kind of put that behind her and accept it for a chance for them to find peace together. Well, at least that's how most people interpret the ending. So I want to talk about my interpretation of that ending. But again, I have to go off on a tangent. The thing with that ending is it kind of misses Ellie's arc. So this is me with my daughter at Comic-Con this year. And the thing with Comic-Con is it's kind of like this magical thing where you have comic books and toys and TV shows, and it kind of is a reminder of why I became a game designer, why I joined video games. And as my daughter gets older and kind of becomes her own little person, I get to see more and more of the world through her eyes. And I wonder what are going to be her inspirations. What are the things that she's going to be kind of really attracted to and attached to as she grows up. And as a game creator, I look around at kind of what we are making and what are going to be her role models from the stories. And I don't like what I see. More specifically, I'm talking about our female characters. And whether we want to admit it or not, these are role models. And yet we sexualize, we objectify, we marginalize, and we reduce these female characters to a lot less than they can be. And this is coming from a guy that almost made a really misogynistic game. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. So once this thing failed and I had this awakening, almost exactly at the same time, this Kickstarter happened about the tropes versus women in video games. And while you might argue with the way it delivers its message or whether every point is exact, you can't argue with just the pattern that you see in the industry. So I was really intrigued by this. The videos for the video games hadn't come out yet, but I watched the rest of Anita's videos, and I realized it's not just a problem in games, it's actually throughout entertainment. So I wanted to learn more about it on my own, so I started reading some of these books. And you see that popular culture has quite a significant effect. And we, as human beings, we mimic the things that we really like and love. And it affects how we feel about ourselves, our self-esteem, how girls feel about themselves, and how us as guys kind of view girls. These things teach us these elements. So while working on The Last of Us, I had this secret agenda that's becoming less and less secret the more I talk about this stuff. I wanted to create one of the coolest non-sexualized female video game protagonists. And I felt like with The Last of Us, if we did that, there's an opportunity here to change the industry. And I know that sounds pretentious, but that was my goal. So Ellie's arc. So Ellie starts out clinging to these parental figures, thinking she needs someone much stronger than her in order to survive in this world. It starts out with Marlene, and pretty quickly it shifts to Joel as they go off on this journey. And she looks up to Joel. She wants to be like him. She wants to win his respect. And it's this kind of theme that we emphasize throughout the entire story. An example of it is like when Ellie's talking to Sam. She talks about how her greatest fear, more than anything, is ending up alone. And yet as the story develops, we see that she's quite capable. In fact, she's been capable this whole time. And many times, like, she stands up to Joel and forces him to respect her as an equal. And at times, even more than that, right? When Joel is, again, we get to this moment that he's incapacitated, and as a player, you become Ellie, and you get to see how strong she is and how she tends to Joel and eventually kind of brings him back to life. And it's as Ellie that you kind of confront the worst of mankind, and you fight a character that does horrible things, not for survival, but for enjoyment. It's the only boss fight in the game. And this whole sequence is structured purposefully in such a way so that you think in the last moment, Joel's going to burst in through that door and save Ellie, but in fact, Ellie saves herself in kind of a brutal way. And then we kind of pay respect to that sequence and show that it has a toll. And just because we're creating strong characters doesn't mean they can't have moments of weakness, that they can't be vulnerable. And at this moment, Joel does his best to cheer Ellie up, to bring her out of this dark place that she went to in her mind. And he opens up to her in ways that he's never opened up to anyone since the death of his daughter. But again, it's Ellie who lifts her own spirits when she finds kind of the beauty in this herd of giraffes. And we come to that ending and that lie and that okay, and what does that okay mean? Well, it's definitely not a complicit, yeah, I'll go along with you. In fact, it's the opposite. It's Ellie for the first time waking up and realizing that she can't rely on him anymore. That while she loves him for what he's done for her, she hates him for robbing her of that choice. She knows that she has to leave him. She has to make her own decisions and her own mistakes. That's her arc going to the end of the line. The thing she wanted most in life is this father figure, but to become truly independent, she has to give that up. And that's kind of like those two arcs are the core truth for me in this story. That all the sacrifices we make as parents is to give our kids tools to make their own decisions. Because that's what I want for my daughter. That even though I'll always be there for her, that she'll eventually grow up and become her own person. And I hope that I leave her with the tools to be better than me. And a big part of that, and this opportunity that I have, is to create better role models. And kind of wrapping this whole thing up, like I want to say that, being honest is the ticket to success, but that's too simplistic, right? Obviously, when you to make a successful game requires, well, gameplay, art, audio, marketing, timing, and a whole lot of luck. But if you happen to get all those things right, and they're coupled with a core truth, then I believe you can make a significant impact. And The Last of Us has only been out for a few months, but I'm pretty damn proud of the impact it's had so far. Thank you. Any questions? There's mics on either side if anyone has questions. Sure, I'll call it. Can you actually line up with the mic so other people can hear it? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I just had a question about the way Ellie reacts when Joel sort of does like a particularly brutal kill. Like sometimes you'll hear it go like, "Oh, holy shit, Joel," or something like that. And I was wondering, was that like a deliberate attempt to sort of give you like a negative feedback loop in the sense of like calling attention to the fact that you're doing really brutal things? Or was that more just like almost a positive feedback loop in the sense of like, whoa, check that out, like that was crazy?
It was partially just to give you a feedback loop, not necessarily positive or negative, but that's where Ellie's character was at that point. So, while she's seen horrible things, she's never seen them this horrible or this up close. So while it isn't scarring like it would be for me or you if we saw that, she still reacts to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My question is about voicing and acting in line with the story. And I was wondering if, as you're creating the characters in the story, as you're writing the storyline, do you kind of have a concept of how you like them to be voiced, the tone of the type of voice? Much like if you're reading a book and you're visualizing a character, does that play into your process, and how?
You can't help when you're writing stuff to kind of voice it in your head. But again, I'd recommend that book by Judith Weston, Directing Actors. She advocates that you kind of let that stuff go, that it's much more interesting and much more creative to see how actors interpret your material and what they make of it and kind of the voice they bring to it. Obviously, you have to like it, what you're hearing and what you're seeing, but I like when actors surprise me and they show me stuff I haven't imagined myself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, do you think it would have been more challenging to make a strong, non-sexualized female character if she was age of majority?
If she was what?
Age of majority, over 18, a woman? Because she was kind of sort of prepubescent, mid-pubescent in the game.
Maybe, but I don't think so, actually. I think, look, I don't think you can't have sexualized female characters, but if you're going to do it, make sure there's meaning behind it, like pay it off, like show how that's important. Like, with Uncharted 2, we wrote Chloe to be quite sexual, and she uses that to her advantage. But that was part of who she was as a person. It wasn't just, let's put some really tight pants on this woman for no reason. And also she was balanced against someone like Elena, and who was very intelligent and is over 18 and isn't sexualized. So I say, yeah, it's definitely, I don't think making Ellie 14 was easier. In some ways, it became really difficult.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, congratulations on the experience. It's like a fantastic game, first off.
Thank you.
I was wondering if we could just go back to the beginning of the game where you're playing through and then Joel's daughter is killed. I remember playing through that. It was the first 5 minutes and I was already choking up and I was like, how the hell do I care so much about this character? I was wondering if you could just talk about how you guys approached that.
Yeah, that was a difficult one because, again, if you watch those tropes videos, we knew we were like killing off a female character and, you know, we'd be accused of Sarah getting fridged. So it was like, well, how do we not just make her a narrative device? How do we give her interesting choices? I think choices really define who a character is. So just by the fact that, you know, she's there up late at night to give her dad a present, she's already made an interesting choice that shows she really cares for her dad. But I think the most significant choice that she makes is actually on the drive. She wants to stop and help the family, and Joel refuses. So we kind of get to see the difference between these two characters. And kind of the last thing is they were both, I would say, brilliantly played by the actors. She was played by Hannah Hayes, this 13-year-old, at the time, 13-year-old actress who just did an incredible job. When she was doing the death scene, she was crying hysterically, and she was really in that moment. It almost didn't seem like acting. So I think all those things kind of came together.
And just quickly, did you feel that having her as a playable character at the beginning, was that a choice?
Oh, yeah, that was actually huge. Thanks, I forgot about that.
No problem.
Yeah, we were struggling with, because again, some of the parts of the stories are a little cliche, and like we're like, okay, how are we going to reveal the first infected? And we talked about you would play as Joel and go over to the neighbor's house, and you see like the husband turn or something, and you have to fight him and then run back to the house. So you kind of, it was the same story, but you saw it through Joel's perspective, and it just seems like I've seen, and I think I might have played this before. But again, we needed to humanize with very short time Sarah. So someone suggested the idea of like, well, what if you played as Sarah? And then they were like, oh, that sounds really cool. And you got to see that whole kind of chaos happening through her eyes. And yeah, it definitely helped empathize with her.
Cool. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
Hi. When you worked with Faith Erin Hicks on The Last of Us comics, did you already have that storyline figured out when you made the comic? And did that storyline at all affect the game story itself in the end? Yeah,
so I had very little of it figured out. Faith is awesome, by the way. So I think I had, and I'm not even sure at this point, my mind might be messing with me. I think I had the idea of Ellie when she was bit, there was someone else with her. I know about it as far as it went. And then, you know, when we kind of decided to do that project, we actually, like, Faith was the top on our list of someone we wanted to work with. And so it was interesting kind of fleshing out that backstory with her, and like, and that actually inspired us to kind of change the writing for the ending and have Ellie talk about Riley. I'm not even sure that we wanted at first for her to mention that. And then there were a bunch of, like, a few other things that affected the storyline, and we kind of threw hints back to the comic book. But the thing with Riley that was interesting working with Faith is, like, I told her, like, I would kind of own Ellie, but Riley's all yours. And, like, you come up with what she looks like, how she talks, and that kind of gave us this separation as we were kind of working on the comic book.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you have a way to summarize some really good ways to really humanize a character and make us fall in love with them. As you'd mentioned before, you were able to do it very quickly at the beginning of the game with Sarah. So just in kind of bullet point form, what would you say are some of the most important factors?
That's a hard one. I think you just, again, it comes down to choices and to show. There's this whole concept that Robert McKee talks about, which is dimensions of character, and he doesn't mean like, oh, they can do karate, but they tie their hair in a ponytail. Like, these are all kind of surface level things, and he talks about really interesting contradiction. So it's like someone that's really strong and yet really vulnerable. Someone that can be brutal at one point and yet really tender in another. Like those are the things that make us humans, because as people we're really complex. So the more you can kind of show off that complexity, the more someone seems like a person instead of, oh, they're just there to serve this narrative purpose. Again, thinking about Sarah, is like we did a lot of environmental storytelling to kind of flesh her out. So if you look around her room, it tells you so much about her character and kind of what she's into. And then like animations, how she moves. So when you see her get scared, that tells you something about her. And yet at the same time, you see after Joel shoots somebody in their home, she's trying to recollect herself and be brave. So again, that was kind of an interesting contradiction for Sarah. So we keep trying to find those moments where they can make interesting choices and show us who they really are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Something that really called out to me and impressed me in the game was the use of restraint, and hearing you talk about Ico certainly connects it to sort of the lineage of games that that work in that. And I'm sort of unrepentantly drawn to gaming as a storytelling medium, perhaps like to a fault. And it was wonderful to see sort of Last of Us kind of embrace that. And now that you've seen it sort of be embraced sort of critically and commercially, maybe further than you thought, do you think that there's room or something you desire to kind of go further with restraint, to sort of do more with less? And even further, is that kind of the enemy of fun and mechanics to some degree? It's something that I love personally, but do you feel like you want to push that further by doing less?
So just so I understand the question, one is you're asking, are we doing a sequel? And two, wait, what was the second part?
Right, so, I mean, when I'm talking about starkness or restraint.
Fun, whether like this is kind of fighting fun. So I'll answer the first one, and I'll try to be as honest as I can with it, which is we love these characters, and we love that world, and we are exploring ideas for how do we continue this story. And there's one story that's recently percolated that seems interesting, but at the same time, this was a really hard project to make, and it was kind of like hard to work on this bleak stuff. And there's this other idea that's a new IP that's kind of been interesting to Bruce and I that we've been brainstorming. And right now we're busy with DLC. So DLC is it's more story, and it's gonna be fucking cool. So don't know. We really don't know and we're kind of like just stalling for time as we're working on this DLC. But once we wrap that up, we have to figure it out. And then the other question, I hear this thing is like, yeah, if you tell like certain stories, your game doesn't have to be fun. I actually disagree with that. I think your game has to be fun, whether you want to call it engaging, entertaining, whatever word you want to use. I think it has to work on that level. It has to work on a level of mechanics. Even when you have downbeat moments, we really try to put mechanics there, whether it's just vaulting over stuff or planks and ladders. We're just trying to engage you as a player and not just a story, because ultimately that's what our medium is good at.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, so up until I played and finished The Last of Us, I didn't think it was possible for a dev studio to put out a game with a story with an ending like the one that you did. What did it take? What did it take to push it through?
Just digging into my heels. Like I've mentioned this before in interviews and stuff, the ending actually focus tests very badly. And partially I think it's because of the focus testers we used. We get hardcore gamers that kind of have certain expectations of what a climax should be in a video game, and don't leave. And like the things that people would complain about is like, yeah, I have all these unresolved questions now, and that's kind of the point. So I saw it as a positive thing, not necessarily a negative thing. And there were a few people on the team that didn't like it, but over time they kind of saw what the story was trying to do. There was never huge fights, and there was never any pressure to change it, or any real pressure to change it.
And this might be slightly controversial, but no one at Sony went ahead and pushed back?
Not at all. We're very lucky at Naughty Dog that we've made very successful games, and Sony's very hands-off with us. And sometimes they'll give feedback, but it's never. I've never been in a position in my 9.5 years at Naughty Dog where some executive was pushing a creative note. So yeah, no.
That's incredible. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hi. This is kind of less a question, more a statement, but I just wanted to speak on, how you were talking about how you became a father recently and how you wanted to create a positive role model for your daughter. And, it honestly just really affected me in a really profound way. I recently became an uncle to a 17-month-old niece, and I just thought that was great, and I can't wait 16 years to have her play the game. Thanks a lot for that.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate it. I mean, that's kind of the hope in airing some of this dirty laundry, and is like that, you guys are game developers. Hopefully this inspires you, like, be honest with your stuff. I think it can pay off. Yeah.
This is also more of a comment as opposed to a question. First of all, I want to thank you for that experience. Was phenomenal. In college, I wrote like a short essay about how I think graphic novels are a new medium of literature, and this game was one of the first games that is proving that games can now be a new piece of literature. And there's so much symbolism. It's so deep, and there's so many levels of things. I just wanted to mention, first of all, I was conflicted on the ending, and everybody argues me on it because I wasn't happy with it, but at the same time I was content. I was really internally conflicted. And the fact that you mentioned your interpretation of it just aired out everything. I don't feel crazy. If the guy that wrote it is saying the same things that I feel, then I feel like I get it. Because I feel like, honestly, it was more about Joel's survival than it was Ellie's. Ultimately, that lie to her was so that he could keep her because he needed her. In the end, I tell everybody, she's the strong one. He needed her more than she needed him. Do you feel similar to that? Am I making sense?
First of all, thank you. Yeah, I think emotionally, Ellie throughout the journey is much stronger than Joel. Joel is very weak from that standpoint, and he kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve, and yeah, I agree.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, so at a couple key points, and you touched on them in your presentation in the game, I think Last of Us is not only avoiding falling into certain tropes, but it's actively subverting them, kind of leading us down one path only to have a kind of unexpected outcome. So there's Ellie's conflict with David. There's the ending, which I think, at least personally, I felt was being built up, and I was like, oh, there's going to be this big kind of Hollywood martyrdom kind of thing, and then it wasn't like that. And then you talked about your secret agenda as well. So I'm just wondering, do you feel that there is some reason that a game that is so, I assume, intentionally kind of subversive and sort of real and sort of anti-Hollywood is so successful now? Do you think that people were waiting for something? Or do you think that people just kind of got, I don't know, satisfied or expectant? You talked about the focus testers and how the ending didn't test well either. Do you think that those people, those focus testers, maybe after they played it again, that they liked it more?
I don't know. I hope they played it again and they liked it more. And it's possible they didn't like it because it wasn't finished. The music wasn't there, a lot of the dialogue was temp, mechanics were kind of clunky. And as we were finishing the game, we saw those kind of numbers of people who didn't like it kind of go down and down. But there was still a pretty significant number that just, it wasn't for them. And as far as if people were waiting, I don't know. Again, I'm not sure why something is successful and other things aren't. All I could tell you is that this was a game that Bruce and I and the rest of the team really wanted to play ourselves, and we're like, let's do that, because that's the one thing we do know. I can't tell you when something is honest or something resonates with me, but I can't tell you why it does or doesn't with someone else.
That's fair. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I just wanted to first say that I really appreciate the approach you guys took with sort of combating, I guess, misogynism in video gaming in this game, and I think you achieved it really well without pontificating or making it sort of a very obvious part of your agenda. The other thing I was curious about, though,
was the element of violence in video games and how a lot of buzzword gets thrown around a lot of ludonarrative dissonance, and how there's sort of a disconnect between the violence in a game and the narrative. And in this game, it seemed very intentional to incorporate that violence as a part of sort of the narrative as a tool, and it had an impact on the characters that you touched on while you were talking earlier. I was just curious how you felt that you succeeded, whether you've succeeded with your intentions of that, or was that even an intention in terms of when you were designing this game?
Yeah, it was a constant struggle to, again, find the fun, and then kind of stay true to the story. And we struggle with this thing, and it's like, how satisfying do you make certain kills versus how revolting you make them. So yeah, again, I'm not sure if it worked for you. That's awesome. I thought it worked for me pretty well. There's actually maybe certain things I would have toned down in hindsight, but I'm proud of kind of what we shipped and how we shipped it, and I felt like we honored a lot of those violent moments in the story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to that, what would you have toned down? If you don't mind.
No, maybe some of the finishers, and like one of the things we struggle with, and I don't have the answer, is the Ellie deaths when you play as a 14-year-old girl, and you're fighting David, and he skewers her with a machete. And we did a lot of iterations of those, and they used to be much more brutal, and we toned it down. And I still heard some complaints about it. And one of the things I struggle with, and again, I'm not sure how to deal with, is like one of the comments I've heard was the death of a female character has different weight to it than a death of a male character because of the history of violence against women. But in doing The Last of Us and trying to say Ellie faces the same consequences as Joel, and therefore you get the same reward when you defeat those consequences, we didn't want to diminish that, so we felt like we had to do those similar kind of death animations, even though if we toned them down for Ellie, and maybe we could have toned those down more to kind of help that, but again, I'm not sure.
Certainly, yeah. And my main question, in terms of DLC, you created a story that, like you said for the last hour, had very complete and honest arcs. Now looking at continuing the story, of talking more, what do you and your team, what avenue are you looking at do you think will be the most effective to deliver similar sort of stories? Do you want to continue the arc, get other avenues off of that? I'd love to know about that process looking at this now.
Yeah, and I can't talk too much about DLC until we kind of show it off, and we're getting closer and closer to being able to show it off. But I will say the one thing we're very conscious of is not repeating ourselves, that whatever we do next has to kind of explore different themes or continue some of these themes, and that's all I can say.
All right.
Yeah.
So when you reconnect with Tommy back at his village and they have like a private talk together, they kind of discuss that there was some really shitty moments between them in the past 20 years where it was just them surviving, but it was really horrible, especially for Tommy, and that's kind of what drove them apart. But you leave it really ambiguous, and I was wondering, why did you leave it super ambiguous, and did you ever have plans to flesh out what really drove them apart, or like what was going on there in the 20 years, because it's a huge time?
I mean, we had a lot of the stuff we left ambiguous figured out for ourselves, so that one is when I'm working with actors, I could fill that backstory for them. But I think it's more interesting to leave that stuff vague, so you can kind of, you become a storyteller in a way. And I think in games we usually fall into the trap of explaining too much and showing too much, and we don't have to. It's like, what's the least we need to tell to kind of portray this story, and then tell nothing more. And for Joel and Tommy, it was just important to know that they had this falling out over something about Joel's violent past, and that was the only important thing. The details of that are not important, so therefore we don't need to get into it.
And so does that mean that every player kind of fills in the narrative for themselves?
Yeah, that's exactly what that means. I was even reluctant about whether to talk about my interpretation of that ending because people have such different interpretation. And I say it's my interpretation because it's not necessarily the ending. If you have a different interpretation that works with the facts that are in the story, then that's valid. This is just the way, this was the original intention, but doesn't mean, intention is nothing. It's whatever you kind of make of the story that matters.
Thanks.
Yeah. Leslie, I'm kind of looking for you to tell me when time's up. So otherwise, I'll just keep answering questions. Okay.
Hey, Neil.
Hey.
Quick question. The length of the game, was that, as it is, it's about, I don't know, like 20-some hours, I guess, maybe? Was that the final length you guys envisioned, or did it grow or shrink based on what you were writing? It seems pretty long for such a narrative-heavy game.
We don't have a vision for length. It's just whatever it kind of ends up as. It ended up being really long, and which is why, you know, we've pushed the date, and we've never done that in Naughty Dog history, and we felt really guilty and responsible for that. But I think it kind of worked in our favor in that I think the arc works really well because it's so slow and it takes a really long time to develop, that when you kind of look back at the characters when they first meet, hopefully you like, they were very different characters.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I was playing it and I noticed, you know, in the post-apocalyptic world is kind of like the new frontier. And as I was playing it, I noticed a lot of these sort of Western themes. Joel being a Southerner, he has that wheel gun. We ride horses at one point. I was wondering, was that actually a big part of your inspiration? And then also, just a side note from the images you were showing, which came first, your beard or Joel's? They're both fantastic.
I think Joel was the first one on our team to have the beard, and then everybody else, everyone that could. Had a beard. Yeah. Sorry, what was the other question?
Just if you were actually inspired by the frontier and Westerns.
Oh, right. Not consciously. We did reference some Westerns. True Grit comes to mind, but there are a few others. So it's just like, you know, in kind of consuming media, you can't help but be inspired by it, but we weren't actively trying to make it Western-esque.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering, the scene where Joel kills the doctors, did that always exist as a gameplay sequence, or was that ever a cinematic?
It was a cinematic for a very long time. And this one designer, Peter Field, would come by my desk on a regular basis and say, we need to make this gameplay. He's like, it'd be so much more powerful if you take the action yourself of killing the doctor, and then you pick up Ellie and you carry her out, and that imagery is going to mirror the imagery in the beginning of the game when you're carrying Sarah. I was like, I know, but the cinematic's already shot and it looks great. But he did this so often that I eventually just, again, I have these attachments to ideas and sometimes it's hard to let go. But when you do let go, you come up with these more interesting solutions. And I think if you're on the journey that Joel is on, and you kind of get where he's at, and you're playing along with that character, it's much more effective the way the game shipped. If you're kind of fighting it, and you're trying to not kill the doctor, and you're trying to find ways to break it, the cinematic would have been much more effective for you. So it was kind of like, I liked it better, the way it shipped, but it was a hard thing to let go.
In the playtest, did you find that people hesitated more, that they just went in guns blazing, or they killed all the doctors, or one of the doctors, or?
That came on so late. I think it was about 50-50. That some people kind of, everyone did it, obviously. No one just threw the controller down and said, I'm done. But, you know, we have these exit interviews and people would argue about it. And it was like, it was cool to see people disagree with that decision and then argue about it and argue the philosophy behind it. I was like, oh, that's actually really awesome. Like, I think if we had given the choice, the discussion, the conversations wouldn't have been as meaningful, and I think we would have broken Joel's character.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I got 3 questions, so I'll try and make them quick. When you were making like the last scene right before the final cutscene, you get control of Ellie, and if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, that's the first time you control Ellie while Joel's kind of like still around and walking. If you could just talk a little bit about that design decision, like, because it kind of stood out to me, and I'm just like, what are they doing here? It was clearly like a obvious choice to make the player Ellie, so. Yeah.
I'm going to steal an answer from Coen Brothers when someone asked them like why they had this really weird prologue to A Serious Man. And all I could say, I'll try to break it down afterwards, but all I could say is it worked better with it than without it. And then in hindsight and trying to figure it out is like, maybe it's interesting to kind of, after Joel does these horrible things, to objectify him, to now play as Ellie and look at Joel from the outside. Maybe it's interesting to be this person that was kind of betrayed. And can you tell them that no more people should line up? Yes, no more people should line up. Yeah, I think it just put you in this really interesting headspace where now you're viewing the characters differently, and made you think more about the decision that they're making and they're about to make in that final cinematic.
Okay, cool. The
One
other
down,
one,
2 to go.
yeah. So the other one is there anything that you did in Uncharted that you didn't feel was really successful, but you feel like you nailed in this game, or like improved upon?
You'll never get me to admit that we nailed anything. I think, the last Uncharted game I worked on was Uncharted 2, and Bruce and I would kind of like talk about this a lot, is we felt we kind of like set the standard for set pieces and how you do set pieces in a kind of character action game, but we didn't do a great job of mirroring those set pieces with the story. And so one thing we're very conscious of in The Last of Us is like when we break down these levels into kind of mini arcs. So each level, like we know, like for example, Pittsburgh, it starts out with Joel being overprotective of Ellie, and by the end of it, he trusts her. So how do we revolve story and gameplay around that concept? Or with Billstown, that was the area where Ellie was going to prove herself. So Joel goes from kind of like pushing her to the side to like slowly trusting her with things. And that's when we had like, and that's why we designed that sequence where the trap flings Joel upwards, upside down, and then Ellie has to save him. Because again, it fit with that theme of like Ellie's having to prove herself. So that's one thing I would say we did better. I'm not sure we nailed it, but it was better.
So last question, I promise. Is there anything that you'd feel like you didn't nail? Now, I know you talked about the ending, but I wonder if there's anything that's like still in your head and you're like, oh, crap, if only we did this better. I
was pretty sad when we cut the dog. There was going to be a dog in the game that Ellie adopts along the way, and we had some interesting ideas of how to use it in gameplay, but it was just one too many things.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, you talked a lot about violence against women in the game, or I guess the consideration of that. And then I guess also at the beginning in the conception, you were thinking about making that only against women, the quadriceps. I mean, I noticed when I was reflecting upon the end of the game that the clickers seemed to be more feminine in design. They were more diminutive. They sort of made more shrieking noises. And I also noticed that the NPCs of the human variety were always male. Was that conscious?
So with the infected, it wasn't a conscious thing to make them more feminine. In fact, we had a variety of male and female for infected. So I guess that I just read that way to you. That wasn't our intention. And with the male characters, we simply ran out of resources. So we had, if you look at the art in the book, the art book, the art in the book, in the art book. You see there are concept art for female hunters. And it just, memory budget, we were already overboard with how many animations we could have in a level, and we just didn't have the resources to build them, all that variety. One thing we insisted on, and again, I'm sure there would have been many other conversations had we finished that task about violence against characters of a certain gender. But yeah, okay, so one thing we insisted on was the multiplayer that we'd have both male and female, that they were both represented. And we took a big hit in that in production, but we felt, at least for multiplayer, it's essential.
Thanks.
Yeah.
After Troy and Ashley were casted, how much did their characters change from what you originally envisioned? And did Nolan North, were you designing David around Nolan North, or was that afterwards?
So Ellie and Joel changed quite a bit after we cast. In fact, I would say Ashley was instrumental in making Ellie more capable. In one of the first cinematics we shot, Ellie gets dragged out of a car and thrown to the ground, and that's again in Pittsburgh, the idea that Joel's being overprotective, so we want to show that Ellie can be in danger, so we put her in a situation where Joel has to save her. And then Ashley was saying on the set, was like, I feel like I should do something. I'm just here getting choked out. Like, I feel like I'd hit him or punch him or shove him or scratch him. Like, you're right, you should be doing that. Like, and let's do it. We had a stunt guy. He's like, yeah, go ahead, hit me. And that was kind of like the impetus to make Ellie a lot more capable in the story. And the other, with Joel, he was much more of a brooding, quiet guy when he was originally written, but the way Troy played him, he actually brought a lot of those emotions to the surface. And we saw this, again, the way Troy was playing him, I realized he's like this much more emotionally unstable guy. And that kind of affected a lot of the writing, and I kind of try to play to that strength. What was the other part of your question?
Nolan North, did you?
Oh, Nolan North.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. We knew we wanted the part where you play as Ellie to fight these cannibals, and there's this character, we call him the Cannibal King. And that would be this boss fight, but we didn't have much more figured out. And at some point, Nolan North was in the studio, and he asked to see some of the game, and we played it for him, and he's like, dude, give me like a bit part. Like, I want to play someone that like Joel kills. And I was like, you know what? I got something more interesting for you. And again, like, a lot of this stuff doesn't get fleshed out until we get to that level. So once we got to Winter, I was like, okay, how do you humanize this guy? How do you like set up a guy that you could believe would lead people and people would look up to him while at the same time he's kind of sick in the head? And that's when kind of his arc started being developed.
Awesome. Thanks, and you're awesome.
Oh, thank you. You're awesome. Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering about, kind of from a creative director standpoint, you create this world that's very immersive and like you believe it and you kind of get immersed in it. And you do the same thing in Uncharted, but you do it in very different ways. So Uncharted, I think you already touched on the set pieces and all that. And there's a lot of parts where the camera is taken from the player and you do like vistas and wide shots, and they kind of present the level, and there's a focus on these worlds. And you don't do any of that, or at least I didn't notice, I played it this weekend, in The Last of Us, but still created this very interesting, deep, believable world that has rules and people living in it that you believe that they live in this world. Just wondering how you did that and the differences between Uncharted and The Last of Us.
Yeah, I mean, we did do it, but the thing we were conscious of is to try to make it more intimate. So, you know, instead of climbing a temple and revealing this beautiful jungle, it's like you turn a corner and you see this beautiful street with sunset reflecting off like the water that's been collecting there.
And just as just a little follow-up, because I'm pretty sure it's related. I played through the game this weekend all in one sitting, pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's.
How long did it take you?
Half of Saturday, all of Sunday.
Wow.
So it was like me on a couch, like 4 feet away from like a 24-inch screen, just kind of playing it. And I noticed that, unlike, I've done the exact same thing with Uncharted 2, where I played it all in one sitting, and that was much more stomachable because the story is much lighter and kind of just action popcorn fare. But you put in title card sequences for the seasons. And I felt like, in hindsight, I should have stopped at those points and taken a break, to let the story sink in. The game doesn't prompt you to do so, but do you think that's maybe a thing to do? Were those title cards put there for pacing on purpose?
Yeah, again, I have to go back to that answer. It's like, it felt better with the title cards than without it, when we tried both. And again, I'm not sure why that is. Sometimes we just try stuff and it feels better. Like we tried also chapters like we did in Uncharted, and it felt worse with those, so we took them out. So yeah, that just happened to be that. I'm told we have to take one more questions, but I'm sticking around and I'm going to go drink with you guys. So if you have any more questions, just buy me lots of alcohol.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
I'm just curious. You already showed us examples of questionable female representations within games. Is there any game out there, or even game developer, that you think is doing it better, or at least not fumbling the ball as much?
Gone Home is pretty awesome. I don't know if you've played that. Yeah, that deserves some applause. Ubisoft is putting out Child of Light, which looks incredible. I can't wait to play that game. So there are examples here and there, but they're kind of rare. And there's no reason, there really isn't a good reason for it. And I think we could do better.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you.